In this IYSL short, we're going to have a look at how you can swap your totals so that they show a different value from your rows. This works both in pivot tables within Excel, but it also has exactly the same DAX in Power BI. So ignore the first part and just copy the code if you're using Power BI. First thing I'm going to need to do is open up a blank workbook, switch to the Data tab. On the left hand side, go to Get Data. Choose the data source that you're interested in, from File, from Database, from Power BI, wherever you're getting it from. I'm going to pull mine in from a workbook. Navigate to where your file is saved, open up, and choose the data you're interested in. In this case, I'm wanting my sales table, my product table, and my habitat table. So I have 3 levels of data. My habitats group each of my products, and my products group each of my sales. I'm going to use the drop down on load and choose load to because I want to take this into the Power Pivot. I want to only create the connection and I want to add this to my data model. That will load my data in. And from here, I can enter the data model by clicking on this little green icon on the right hand side of the data tab. In Power Pivot, you can do things like create calculated columns using a language called DAX. This can store far more than the limitation of 1 million rows, so it's really useful, and you should check out our playlist here about how to use it in full. But for the time being, I'm just going to click on Diagram View and make sure that all my tables are linked. My purchase table is connected to my product table using the product ID, so I can click and drag these two together. It's like a VLOOKUP, but much faster. Same thing with my product table to the habitat table, grab my habitat ID, and join that to my habitat ID. So now whenever I reference anything from the purchase table in line with the habitat table, it will automatically filter the data to only include those rows. So counting transactions or summing total sales. Switch back to Data View by using the right hand icon. And now what we need is a measure. A measure is a calculation that is run when you put it into the visual. You can create your measure on any of your tables. To do so, you just click in this bottom section below the data. I'm going to make mine in the habitat table, but you can make it in a different table. Click into one of those cells and then up the top click into this little input box here. First I need a name, so I'm going to create this as alternate totals, then colon equals. Obviously if you're typing this in Power BI you don't need the colon. So that's the name of my measure. If I want to go into a new line I have to remember to hold in the shift key. It's rather annoying, but otherwise you're committing the data. The function that I'm going to type in is the if function because I want to test if a condition is true or false. Except I want to have 3 levels. I want to have my row level where I want to return the sum of quantity. I want to have my subtotal level when I want to return the average for that habitat. And then I want my grand total where I'm going to put in a bit of descriptive text. I could nest my ifs, but both in DAX and in Excel we have a really helpful function, switch. If you've never used the switch function, it is really handy. The first thing you need to decide is, are you going to test if something is true or if something is false? Just like you do in an if statement, but here you're getting to choose what you're going for. I believe in the power of positive thinking, so I'm going to go with true. Comma. The first value I'm putting in is an expression. So my expression is going to be, is the row filtered? So I'm going to say, is filtered. And I'm going to say, my product name. So this will return true if in the pivot table, I'm on the row of a product. So if I'm looking at a particular item and its sales. It will return false on the habitat row and it will return false on the grand total. I'm going to say comma, and what I would like to do is return the sum of my quantity column. I'm going to go for a new line. Remember to hold shift. And I'm going to ask the same thing. I'm going to say is filtered. But this time I'm moving up a row within the pivot table and I'm looking at the subtotal. So that is going to be my habitat name. And for this one, instead of returning the sum of quantity, I'm going to return the sum of quantity. And because that's grouped to the habitat, that's the sales for all of the products that belong to that habitat. And I want to divide it by the number of products that belong to this habitat. So I'm going to say count product ID. So effectively, if my water environment gets 50,000 sales, it's going to return 50,000 divided by however many water products I have. Finally, I'm going to put in one more, and I'm going to say this must be the total. So there are, ampersand allows me to concatenate two strings together. I want to concatenate on the count of habitat ID. Ampersand habitats and then I'm going to concatenate on again using the ampersand the count of product ID, and then finally ampersand on products. So this is going to read something like there are 7 habitats and 19 products, and that's going to appear in my total. So the way the switch function works is it's testing if the following conditions are true, just like an if statement. I'm going to check if I'm on the row of the product by saying, is the product name filtered? If it is, return the sum of quantity. If this returns false, because the product name is not filtered, it's going to go and it's going to say, hey, are you actually on the subtotal? Are you on the habitat name? And it's going to say, are you filtered? If so, return the total sales for that habitat and divide it by how many products belong to that habitat. Finally, if you've returned false on both of these, you must be the grand total, in which case just return a little message telling us how many habitats there are and how many products there are. Hit return to save that measure, and then click on pivot table to create your pivot table. I'm going to create it on the existing worksheet. Click OK. Over on the right hand side, I'm going to grab my habitat name. I'm going to put that into the rows. I'm going to scroll down. I'm also going to put the product name into the rows as well. And from my purchase table, I'm going to put my quantity into the values. By default, this is giving us one row for each of our products and grouping that to the habitat. When minimized, I can see the subtotal. I'd like to see them all the time. So making sure I'm clicked inside of my pivot table, doesn't matter where, but I'm going to go up to the Design tab. On the Design tab on the far left hand side, I'm going to go to Subtotals, and I'm going to tell it that I want to show the subtotals. And now I can see the subtotals. If I want to see them all at the same time, I can choose Show All, and I'll see those subtotals. Now, all I need is my measure. So if you go to your habitat table or wherever you stored the measure, drag your alternate totals into the values. And now what you'll see is you've got a brand new column. And when we're looking at the row, the sum of quantity is exactly the same. But when we're looking at the subtotal, we're now looking at the average instead of the total. If I scroll down to the grand total, I can see I've put my own message in. If you'd wanted blanks instead, that would have been nice and easy. Click on Data. Click on your Go to Power Pivot window. Click back on the table with your measure and click on the cell with the measure. To replace my message with just a blank or do it on any of the rows, I could just type in blank. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to have a total. Hit return. Switch back to the front end and you'll see that now you're returning a blank. As I said, in Power BI, the code would have been identical. So I can literally switch to Power BI. I've got the same kind of thing, except it's called a matrix here. I can go to any of my tables, right click, new measure, type in the same code, or in this case I've copied and pasted, without the colon, don't need that. Hit return, and add that into your visual. And you'll have the same effect, those alternate values for our totals and our subtotals. I hope you've enjoyed this Wise Owl short. If you have, do consider giving us a like, and if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video.